Story number 1. It was slightly past 11 p.m., and I found myself alone in the rear section of the hardware store where I worked as an overnight attendant. With my usual coworker on vacation, I embraced the solitude, knowing that any unfinished tasks would likely go unnoticed. As the rain poured outside, I focused on rearranging boxes, humming to alleviate the monotony. Amidst the sound of the rain, I heard a peculiar noise coming from the front of the building. Initially dismissing it as the building settling, I resumed my work. But the sound persisted, arousing my curiosity. I walked towards the front and glanced through the smudged glass of the front door. Seeing nothing initially, I returned to my tasks. After a while, the sound repeated, this time with movement near the front door. Compelled to investigate, I approached the door and witnessed a figure outside. As I drew closer, the person quickly fled, leaving marks on the door, indicating an attempted break-in. Concerned, I called the police while standing by the door, awaiting help. To my surprise, the figure reappeared, and I retreated to a safer distance. They'd forcefully tried to break the glass, prompting me to sprint to the rear of the store and secure myself in the office. From there, I heard the glass shatter and the alarm blare, heightening my fear. Several minutes of tense silence passed until the police arrived and conducted a search. Strangely, the intruder was nowhere to be found within the store. Their motives remained a mystery, as they had not stolen anything or engaged in further illicit activities. The incident left me unsettled, with unanswered questions haunting me to this day. Story number 2. I worked for nearly 15 years as a bus driver for suburban kindergarten and elementary schools in my local area. After retiring from that position, I began driving buses in the city where I lived. Although I genuinely enjoyed transporting children, it became increasingly challenging to maintain a cheerful demeanor and interact with energetic and sometimes unruly kids as I grew older. In the city, the bus depot was conveniently located a short 10-minute walk from my apartment. Most passengers boarded and disembarked without any major issues. While the driving aspect of my new job was more stressful, it still provided a sense of relief compared to my previous position. The bus company in the city operated 24/7, but during the night, there were only a few buses running longer routes. Since few drivers were willing to take these night shifts, all daytime drivers, including myself, were required to work 2 night shifts every other week. It had its challenges, mainly disrupting my sleep schedule. On the bright side, there were fewer passengers during those hours, and the roads were less congested, making the job somewhat more relaxing compared to the daytime hours. During one particular night, around 2 or 3 a.m., the city was deserted. I had been driving my usual route for about an hour, and no one had needed a ride. I didn't expect anyone else to board at the last stop, so I parked the bus, taking advantage of the quiet moment to rest. As I rested with my head against the seat, I was abruptly awakened by a sudden noise. To my surprise, an older man was standing at the door, staring at me. Feeling slightly nervous and awkward, I forced a smile and opened the door for him. He stepped inside, scanned his bus pass, and made his way to the back, where he took a seat. Assuming he was preoccupied with something or had earbuds in, I followed the standard protocol and made all the scheduled stops along the route. Throughout the drive, I frequently checked the mirror, and each time, I noticed the man sitting at the back, fixated on the road ahead. Although his behavior struck me as peculiar, it was difficult to discern what might be going through someone's mind at such an early hour. We approached the last 2 stops on the route, and I wondered when the man would disembark since the loop would bring us back to where he had initially boarded. When I pulled up to the next stop, I parked the bus and glanced at the man's reflection in the mirror. After a brief pause, he stood up and began walking down the aisle, his eyes fixed on the floor, an exceedingly unusual sight. As he drew nearer, I turned my body around and caught a glimpse of his face, contorted with anger and rage. Trying to maintain composure, I refocused my attention on the road. The man stopped right beside me, and when I looked over, his intense stare pierced through me. attempting to diffuse the tension. I asked if everything was all right, but he continued to glare before finally looking away and returning to his seat. A sense of unease washed over me, and worry started to creep in. After a momentary pause, I shifted the bus back into gear and proceeded to the next and final stop. Once we arrived, I parked the bus and waited, sensing an indescribable tension in the air. Suddenly, the man sprang to his feet, swiftly approached me, and forcefully shoved me against the side window. I felt the cold touch of a gun pressed against my head, and our eyes locked in an intense stare. His expression remained filled with the same blend of fury and rage I had witnessed earlier. Story number 3. During my mid-20s to early 30s, I worked at a library, primarily during overnight shifts as a stalker and reorganizer. Initially, I had been hired for mid-shifts, but a few months later, they introduced a new overnight position. The library was an immense, old stone building situated in the center of town, repurposed as a modern library. Due to its size, it became challenging for the staff to consistently keep up with stocking and reorganizing the books throughout the day. Despite the need for overnight workers, no one wanted to take on the night shift because it meant being alone in the library all night. Initially, I hesitated as well, but the offer of a $2 per hour increase in pay for overnight shifts was too enticing to pass up at the time. So I accepted the position. In the beginning, everything seemed to be going well. Even though my tasks were similar to what I did during mid-shifts, working overnight felt like an entirely different job. I no longer had to interact with customers or waste time assisting them. I could focus solely on my work, listen to music, and enjoy a peaceful environment without any interruptions. However, as the months passed, I gradually became more and more uncomfortable while working. It was strange because I expected to grow more comfortable over time, but instead, I found myself increasingly fixated on the age of the building, which began to creep me out. Sometimes, when I glanced up from the bookshelves, I would see the vast, empty, dimly lit room with its seemingly endless aisles, and it would send shivers down my spine. Even when I removed my headphones, the silence seemed to amplify my unease. Then, one night, while engrossed in my usual routine of listening to music and stalking the books, I heard a sound coming from the other side of the large room. It caught my attention, and I paused, realizing that I had indeed heard something. I removed my headphones and looked up, standing frozen in place for a few minutes, afraid to move. I anticipated something else to happen, but nothing did. Eventually, I resumed my work, albeit with my headphones now left out. After finishing rearranging a shelf, I wheeled my cart to the back to retrieve the book returns. It was then that I heard the sound again, much clearer this time without the barrier of my headphones. The noise resembled something falling and hitting the ground, perhaps just a small book, but in the vast, quiet space, it echoed loudly. Once again, I found myself rooted to the spot, staring in the direction of the sound. Considering the library was filled with countless books, it wasn't entirely implausible for a few to fall randomly. However, that didn't alleviate my growing unease. Something felt off, as if I were being watched. My mind began to conjure up various reasons to be fearful of the place, and I fought hard to keep from panicking. Aware of my tendency to scare myself for no reason, I mustered the courage to investigate. I walked cautiously through the aisles, scanning each bookshelf. When I reached the last aisle, I found nothing amiss. No fallen books or anything out of the ordinary. Panic started to rise within me once more. As I turned around, my heart skipped a beat. Someone was standing near the door leading to the back storage room, hidden in the far corner as if trying to blend into the wall. It was evident that this person had been watching me. Suppressing the urge to scream and run, I looked away, retraced my steps down the aisles, unlocked the front door, and hurriedly exited the building. Subscribe to the channel for more updates.